the closed window and balcony. Escape route impossibility analysis. We've walked through maternal hearing and acoustic impossibilities, examined staging geography and biological clocks. And now we need to turn our attention to something so fundamental, so basic to the logic of the intruder theory, that it sits almost invisible in plain sight. We need to think about escape routes, about how someone supposedly entered that house, accomplished what they came to do, and departed, all without leaving evidence of viable exit. Because here's what whispers from the architecture itself, from the documented state of windows and doors, from the absence of certain crucial elements that should have been present. If someone truly came from outside, if they truly intended to leave with her or to escape after events took a different turn, they needed a way out, a path that was ready, that was open, that provided the means of departure without requiring them to navigate through a house where parents might wake at any moment. And yet, when we examine what was actually documented that morning, we find something troubling. We find windows that were closed, a balcony door that was latched, an absence of the tools, ladders, ropes, evidence of preparation. That would suggest someone had actually planned an exit strategy from a second-story bedroom. Let's establish what we're looking at before we begin to interpret its significance. From the documented evidence, her bedroom window was closed, not ajar, not showing signs of having been opened recently. Closed. The balcony that could have provided access from her room to the outside was secured. No ladder was found propped against the house beneath that balcony. No evidence of climbing equipment. No indication that someone had prepared a means of descending from the second floor while carrying a 45-pound child. From a logical standpoint, this creates an immediate problem for certain narratives. If someone entered that bedroom intending to remove her from the house, if the goal was truly what a ransom note would suggest, taking her somewhere for leverage, they needed not just entry, but exit. They needed a route that would allow them to depart with her without traversing the interior of the house, without passing through spaces where parents might intercept them, without relying on luck and hope that everyone would remain asleep while they navigated stairs and hallways with a child who might wake and cry out. Theme 1. The architecture of entrapment, when windows tell their own story. When we think about criminal behavior, when we study how people actually operate when they're trying to accomplish something illegal and avoid detection, one principle emerges with remarkable consistency. You plan your exit before you execute your entry. From a criminological perspective, this isn't sophisticated criminal expertise. It's basic survival instinct, the kind of logic that operates even in the most amateur offenders. You don't trap yourself in a location where discovery equals capture. You don't put yourself in a position where your only escape route requires navigating through spaces controlled by potential witnesses. You secure your exit. You ensure you have a way out that doesn't depend on continued good luck or on people remaining conveniently asleep while you make your departure. And yet, if we accept the intruder narrative as presented, we're asked to believe in someone who violated this most basic principle, who entered a child's bedroom on the second floor without ensuring they had a viable means of departing from that same location. Let's think about what preparing an exit would require. From a logical standpoint, if you're planning to remove someone from a second-story bedroom, you need equipment. A ladder is the most obvious solution, something sturdy enough to support the combined weight of an adult and child, something that can be positioned against the house and remain stable during descent. Or you need the balcony door to be unlocked, to provide a means of moving from interior to exterior at second floor level, with a plan for how to get from the balcony down to ground level. Or you need a rope, climbing equipment, some means of controlled descent that doesn't require simply jumping and hoping neither person is hurt in the fall. Each of these options represents planning, preparation, someone thinking through the logistics of not just the crime, but the escape. And yet, none of these elements were present. No ladder was found. The balcony door was secured from inside. No rope or climbing equipment was documented. The window was closed, showing no signs of having been recently opened or serving as an active exit point. From a psychological perspective, let's consider what it means to enter a space without securing your exit. It suggests either profound stupidity, someone who simply didn't think through the implications of their choices, or it suggests that exit through the bedroom window was never actually part of the plan, that whoever was in that bedroom during those hours either didn't need an exterior exit because they weren't planning to take her out of the house, or they had access to exits that didn't require windows and ladders because they had the authority to move through the house using doors, using normal pathways, using the routes that family members would use. The absence of prepared exit equipment, the closed and secured state of potential egress points, tells us something about the mindset and the situation that night. And what it tells us strains against the narrative of an outsider coming in, accomplishing their goal, and departing into the night. Now, let's consider the risk calculation that would be required for the intruder scenario to work. From a criminological standpoint, every minute you spend inside an occupied dwelling is a minute when discovery becomes more likely. The noise you make, the movements you create, the simple probability that someone will wake to use the bathroom or check on children, all of these risks compound with time. So, if you've entered through some means and you're in a child's bedroom and you don't have a prepared exit from that bedroom, you're now forced to consider navigating back through the house, down the hallway, downstairs, past the master bedroom where parents sleep, through whatever route leads to an exit you can actually use. Each step of that journey is another opportunity for discovery, another moment where a squeaking floorboard or a child's cry could bring parents out of their room and into your path. The theory asks us to believe someone accepted this compounding risk without preparing the one thing that could have eliminated it, a direct exit from the room where they were operating. Let's shift to the anthropological context of how burglars and home invaders actually operate when observed and studied. Across cultures, across criminal contexts, patterns emerge. When people enter occupied homes illegally, they overwhelmingly choose ground floor entry and exit points. They avoid going upstairs when possible, because upstairs removes them from easy escape, because upstairs often puts them closer to where occupants are sleeping, because upstairs creates the very problem we're examining. How do you get back down and out without being discovered? When they must operate on upper floors, they prepare exit routes that don't require going back through the interior. They prop doors, they position ladders, they ensure that if something goes wrong, if occupants wake, They have a way out that doesn't depend on luck. The closed window, the secured balcony, the absence of ladder. All of these create a pattern that doesn't match how people actually behave when they're trying to accomplish something in an occupied home and escape detection. From a philosophical perspective, we're confronting questions about intention and preparation. The state of the egress points tells us something about what was actually being planned versus what we're told was planned. If the goal was truly to take her from the house, if this was genuinely intended to be the kind of situation where she would be removed for ransom, then the lack of prepared exit makes no sense. It's not just poor planning, it's planning that creates circumstances where success becomes nearly impossible. You've entered the most difficult part of the house to escape from. You're planning to depart with a child who might make noise. And your exit strategy is hope nobody wakes up while you navigate through multiple rooms and downstairs. This doesn't describe criminal behavior. This describes entrapment, circumstances where someone ended up in that bedroom not because they planned to operate there, but because that's where events occurred, where someone was already present, where the architecture of family life, rather than criminal planning, determined the geography of what happened. From a physiological standpoint, let's think about what carrying a 45-pound child down a ladder would require, assuming a ladder had been present. It's not impossible, but it's not simple either. You need both hands to control the ladder descent safely. If the child is unconscious or deeply asleep, they're dead weight, requiring you to manage their body position while maintaining your own balance and grip. If the child is awake, you're managing not just weight but potential resistance, movement that could throw off your balance, vocalization that might alert the household. Now try to picture doing this from a second-story balcony or window in darkness, while knowing that any mistake, a fall, a cry, the sound of the ladder scraping against siding could bring parents to that very window you're descending from. The physical challenge, combined with the acoustic risk, makes this scenario implausible, even if the exit had been prepared. The fact that it wasn't prepared, that no ladder was present, that the window was closed, moves us from implausible to impossible. So when we step back and consider the architecture of entrapment, closed windows, secured balconies, absent ladders, no prepared means of second-floor egress, we're looking at evidence that fundamentally undermines the intruder narrative. From every analytical perspective, logical, philosophical, psychological, physiological, forensic, anthropological, and criminological, the state of potential exit points tells us that whoever was in that bedroom during those hours either didn't need an exterior exit or failed to prepare one despite its absolute necessity for the scenario we're asked to believe. The windows and doors aren't neutral elements of architecture. They're witnesses, preserving in their closed and secured state a truth about planning and intention that contradicts the narrative of an outsider coming in, executing a plan, and escaping into the night. They whisper instead of someone who was already inside, who didn't need to plan external exits because their presence in that house was natural, whose escape didn't require ladders and windows because they could simply walk through doors that were always open to them. Theme 2, the compounding risk, why rational actors don't trap themselves. We've established that no viable exit was prepared from the bedroom, And now we need to follow this thread to its logical conclusion. We need to think about what this means for the entire sequence of events we're asked to believe occurred. Because the absence of prepared exit doesn't just affect the bedroom phase, it affects everything that supposedly came after. From a criminological perspective, when someone commits themselves to a course of action in an occupied dwelling without securing their exit, they're accepting that every subsequent moment compounds their risk. Each minute they remain in the house is another opportunity for discovery. Each movement through the house is another chance for a squeaking floor or a cry to wake someone. And each phase of whatever they're planning requires them to continue accepting this compounding risk without the reassurance of knowing they have a way out if things go wrong. Let's trace through what the theory asks us to believe and see where the compounding risk becomes not just improbable, but absurd. According to the narrative, someone entered that house and made their way to her bedroom. Already we're accepting significant risk, moving through an occupied home, navigating to the second floor where family sleeps, entering a child's room. But let's say they accomplished this without waking the household. Now they're in her bedroom. She's in her bed. And here's where the risk calculation we're being asked to accept begins to strain logic. If a stun device was used, as some suggest, that creates noise and causes involuntary response. Risk of waking parents. If she was lifted while sleeping, there's risk she'll wake partially and cry out. If she was somehow convinced to leave willingly, there's risk she'll speak loudly enough to be heard. Every method of getting her out of that bed and out of that room carries acoustic risk. And all of this risk is being accepted by someone who has not prepared a direct exit from this room, who is committing themselves to needing to move back through the interior of the house to reach any exit they can actually use. Let's follow them as the theory requires. They've somehow gotten her out of the bedroom. Now they're in the hallway, past the brother's room, near the master bedroom where parents sleep. Every step creating potential noise. Every moment another opportunity for someone to wake and check on the children. And according to some versions of the narrative, they don't just move straight to an exit, they take her to the kitchen. The pineapple evidence suggests she was awake at some point, eating, drinking tea. From a logical standpoint, if you've successfully removed a child from her bedroom without waking the household, why would you then take her to the kitchen, a space even more central to the home, even more likely to be heard from the master bedroom if any sound occurs? Why would you pause in your escape to allow her to eat? Why would you create more time, more opportunity for discovery, when every second you remain in that house moves you closer to the moment when someone wakes and your entire plan collapses? From a psychological perspective, let's think about the mental state this compounding risk would create. You've entered an occupied home. You're on the second floor with no prepared exit. You've somehow managed to get a child out of her room without waking the parents. And now you're pausing? You're allowing time to pass while she eats pineapple? This suggests either someone so confident in their control of the situation that they feel no urgency, or it suggests that the person with the child isn't actually a stranger worried about discovery. From a criminological standpoint, criminals operating in occupied homes display a particular kind of behavior. They work quickly. They minimize time on site. They avoid creating situations where their continued presence compounds risk. What we're asked to believe, a leisurely movement through the house, time spent in the kitchen, actions that extend the window of potential discovery, doesn't match any documented pattern of how criminals actually behave in these scenarios. Now let's follow the narrative further into the basement. Somehow, after spending time in the kitchen, after compounding risk by remaining in the house far longer than any exit-focused plan would require, they take her to the basement. According to the theory, this is where things went wrong, where whatever was planned shifted into something terrible that ended her life. But let's stop and ask ourselves, what rational actor gets this far into a plan? Successfully navigating the bedroom removal, successfully moving through the house to the kitchen, successfully keeping her quiet enough that parents sleeping above don't wake, and then encounters a mishap in the basement so catastrophic that it destroys the entire plan. From a logical standpoint, if you've managed the most difficult parts, the parts where discovery was most likely, where the parents were closest, where any sound would most certainly bring investigation, why would you lose control in the basement, the part of the house most isolated from where parents sleep, where some noise might be less likely to carry? Let's think about this from an anthropological lens. In actual cases where children have been taken for ransom, we see patterns. The taking happens quickly. The child is removed from the location as rapidly as possible because every second in proximity to family increases risk of intervention. The perpetrators don't pause to allow the child to eat. They don't spend extended time in the home creating opportunities for discovery. They execute the removal and depart, understanding that time is their enemy, that each moment of delay increases the probability of failure. What we're asked to believe in this case is the opposite of this pattern. Extended time in the house, movement through multiple locations, a kitchen stop that serves no purpose in a kidnapping plan, all culminating in the basement where somehow, despite having maintained control through all the higher risk phases, control is suddenly lost. This pattern doesn't describe rational criminal behavior. It describes something else entirely, perhaps events that unfolded without planning, without a coherent escape-focused logic, because the person involved didn't need to escape, didn't need to worry about being discovered as an intruder, because they belonged in that house to begin with. From a physiological perspective, we need to think about stress and decision-making under pressure. Someone executing the plan we're asked to believe would be operating under extreme stress. The fight or flight response would be activated throughout this extended period in the house. Heart rate elevated, senses heightened, every sound amplified by stress-induced auditory sensitivity. In this state, the human tendency is to minimize time in dangerous environments, to execute and evacuate, to reduce exposure. What we're asked to believe, that someone in this acute stress state chose to extend their time in the house, chose to create additional opportunities for discovery by pausing in the kitchen, chose to move to the basement rather than exiting at any of multiple earlier opportunities, contradicts everything we know about human behavior under stress. People in acute fear don't choose to compound their exposure to danger. They seek to minimize it, to escape as quickly as possible. The pattern of movement through that house, the extended timeline, the multiple locations visited, all of this suggests someone who wasn't operating under the stress of being an intruder in imminent danger of discovery. So when we consider the compounding risk, each phase accepting more exposure, more opportunity for discovery, more time in the house, without any of this leading to immediate departure, we see a pattern that makes no sense if we're talking about an outsider trying to accomplish something and escape. From every analytical perspective, logical, philosophical, psychological, physiological, forensic, anthropological, and criminological, the risk acceptance pattern we're asked to believe is not how humans behave when they're genuinely concerned about being discovered. It's how people behave when they're not worried about discovery because they're not intruders. When the house is theirs. When being found in the kitchen or the basement wouldn't require explanation because they have every right to be there. The compounding risk collapses the intruder theory. Not because any single element is impossible, but because the cumulative improbability, accepting higher and higher risk without securing exits, without minimizing time on site, without behaving in any way that matches actual criminal behavior, becomes untenable. We're being asked to believe in a criminal actor who doesn't exist in any documented pattern of human behavior. Theme 3, the basement paradox, why success breeds its own impossibility. We've traced the compounding risk through the house, and now we need to confront perhaps the most troubling logical problem in the entire intruder narrative, the basement paradox. Because here's what sits at the heart of this theory. Waiting to be noticed, if everything worked up to the basement, if control was maintained through the bedroom removal and the kitchen pause and the descent to the lower level, then why did it all fall apart at precisely the point where discovery would have become less likely rather than more? From a logical standpoint, this creates an inversion of risk that makes no sense. The theory requires us to believe that someone maintained perfect control through the highest risk phases, when parents were closest, when any sound would most likely bring investigation, but lost that control in the lowest risk location, the place most isolated from parental hearing. Let's examine why this paradox doesn't just strain credulity, but shatters it entirely. Think about what would have to be true for the narrative to work. Someone enters the house, navigates to the second floor, removes her from her bedroom, all without waking the parents sleeping nearby. This is the most difficult part, the phase where any mistake creates immediate discovery. And yet, according to the theory, they execute this flawlessly. They maintain sufficient control that she doesn't cry out loudly enough to wake parents. They manage to get her out of her room and into the hallway without creating disturbance that brings investigation. They take her to the kitchen, allow her time to eat, and still maintain enough control that no alarm is raised. This is extraordinary competence, extraordinary management of risk and control. And then, in the basement, isolated from the master bedroom by 2 floors and distance, where some noise might be less likely to reach sleeping parents, suddenly, catastrophically, control is lost. Struggle occurs. Events spiral into circumstances that end her life. From a criminological perspective, this pattern is backwards. If control was going to be lost, we would expect it to happen during the high-risk phases, not during the low-risk phase. The fact that it allegedly happened in the basement makes no sense. Let's think about this from a psychological perspective. Someone who has maintained control through all the difficult parts would be, if anything, more confident by the time they reached the basement. They've successfully done what seemed impossible, moved through an occupied house with a child, avoided detection, managed her cooperation or silence. Why would they lose control now? What would happen in the basement that would cause someone who demonstrated such capability in more difficult circumstances to suddenly become incapable? The theory offers no plausible mechanism for this shift. We're simply asked to accept that somehow, after proving their ability to manage every high-risk element, they encountered something in the basement that overwhelmed that ability. But what? What changes in the basement that would create this catastrophic loss of control? From a criminological standpoint, let's consider what we know about similar cases where things go wrong during attempted abductions. When criminals lose control of situations, it typically happens during the highest risk phases, during initial contact, during the removal from a location, when the victim first realizes they're in danger and begins to resist. We don't typically see criminals successfully navigate all the highest risk elements and then lose control in the lowest risk environment. And we especially don't see it in cases where the loss of control is so catastrophic that it not only ends the primary plan, but creates circumstances that require extensive staging to conceal. If someone had successfully gotten this far, bedroom to kitchen to basement, and then things went wrong, we would expect quick departure. Cut losses, leave the scene, avoid the compounding risk that staging would create. Instead, we're asked to believe they stayed, they staged, they spent hours constructing a narrative. This doesn't describe how criminals respond to planned failure. This describes how people respond when they can't leave, because leaving would mean abandoning their home, their other child, their life. Now, let's consider the alternative explanation, the one that makes sense of all these paradoxes. What if there was no intruder? What if she was already downstairs for reasons that had nothing to do with kidnapping? Perhaps she woke on her own, came down for the reasons children come down in the middle of the night. Bad dreams, thirst, bathroom, any of the normal reasons. Perhaps she encountered someone already downstairs, a sibling who was also awake, engaged in nighttime activities. Perhaps whatever happened next wasn't planned, wasn't part of any coherent strategy, but emerged from a situation that escalated beyond anyone's ability to control it. From a logical perspective, this explains why there was no prepared exit from the bedroom, because she wasn't removed from the bedroom by someone else. She left it herself. It explains why she was in the kitchen, because she went there on her own, or with someone she trusted completely. It explains why events unfolded in the basement, because that's where the situation progressed naturally, not because someone with a kidnapping plan chose that location. And it explains why control was lost, not because someone competent suddenly became incompetent, but because what happened wasn't controlled to begin with. It was reaction, escalation, panic, circumstances spiraling beyond anyone's capacity to manage them. Let's shift to the philosophical implications of the basement paradox. We want to believe that criminal plans unfold with logic, that people who demonstrate capability don't suddenly lose it without cause, that success in difficult phases predicts success in easier phases. But the basement paradox forces us to abandon these comfortable beliefs. It asks us to accept that logical causation simply doesn't apply, that someone became less capable as their situation became easier, that control vanished precisely when it should have been strongest, or we can accept the simpler explanation that there was no intruder, no plan, no executed strategy that would require this improbable pattern of success and failure. There were people already in the house, events that emerged without planning, a situation that escalated in the way family crises escalate when children are involved and when terrible mistakes are made that cannot be undone. From an anthropological lens, we can examine how families respond to internal crises versus how strangers respond to planned failures. When strangers encounter obstacles to their plans, they typically abandon and evacuate. When families encounter unbearable situations involving their children, they stay, they attempt to manage, they make decisions driven not by logic, but by desperate love and devastating fear. The pattern we see: no prepared exit, extended time in the house, staging rather than departure, containment within the home rather than escape from it. This is the pattern of family crisis, not criminal execution. It's the pattern of people who can't leave because this is their home, who can't simply walk away because their other child is upstairs, who can't call authorities because doing so would mean confronting truths they cannot bear to face. So, when we confront the basement paradox, the question of why control was supposedly maintained through all the difficult parts, only to be lost in the easiest part, we're looking at the final collapse of the intruder narrative. From every analytical perspective, logical, philosophical, psychological, physiological, forensic, anthropological, and criminological, the pattern makes no sense if we're talking about an outsider executing a plan. It only makes sense if we're talking about something that happened within the family, something that emerged without planning, something that unfolded in the basement, not because someone chose that location strategically, but because that's where the situation naturally progressed. The closed windows and secured balconies weren't problems for the person or people involved because they didn't need external exits. They needed only to navigate the terrible hours between discovery and dawn, between the moment everything went wrong and the moment when help would have to be summoned. The house wasn't a trap for an intruder. It was a containment for a family crisis. Walls that held in secrets too terrible to release. Doors that opened only to those who had always belonged there. We've walked through the closed windows and secured balconies, traced the compounding risk that makes no sense for a rational criminal actor, and confronted the basement paradox where success supposedly transformed into catastrophic failure for no logical reason. What emerges isn't just doubt about the intruder theory. It's recognition that the theory requires us to believe in patterns of behavior that don't exist in documented criminal psychology, risk calculations that no rational person would accept, and a sequence of success and failure that inverts every expectation about how capability operates. The closed window isn't just a closed window. It's evidence that no exit was prepared because no exit was needed. The missing ladder isn't just an oversight. It's confirmation that whoever was in that bedroom belonged there, didn't need equipment to move through the house because they could simply walk through doors that had always been open to them. The architecture itself becomes witness, preserving in its secured and undisturbed state a truth that refuses to align with the narrative we were given. Someone was in that house during those hours. Someone moved through those spaces. But they weren't an intruder trying to escape. They were family, trapped not by closed windows, but by circumstances too terrible to acknowledge, and truths too devastating to face.